Hello and welcome to lesson one of the Lease Hacker's Guide. This is a brief discussion about leasing. Now, if you bought this course, I'm sure you've already decided that leasing is the right thing for you or you're very interested in leasing, but I just wanted to touch on a few points to let you know why I thought so too. So, when does leasing make sense and why? Well, think about it. Have you known somebody, or is it maybe yourself, who always has a car payment? So they're using finance vehicles like a lease. So they finance a car and they're trading it in before it's paid off at like year 4 or year 5 and just constantly doing that and having to roll negative equity over and paying a higher payment. So if you're someone like that, if you always have a car payment, then maybe you should be leasing. The reason is a lease payment is typically lower than a finance payment. And the reason for that is when you lease a car, you're essentially paying to use the car for a specific period of time rather than owning the vehicle outright. Because you're only paying for the car's depreciation during the lease term rather than the full value of the car, your monthly payments are typically lower than they would be if you were financing the purchase. So, what that means is you're just paying the car down to a certain residual value, which we'll talk about in a second. You're only paying for the use of the vehicle, the value of it while you're driving it. You're not paying it all the way down to zero. Therefore, you're paying, just up for a portion of the vehicle, where someone who finances it is paying for the entire vehicle. So for that reason, in most cases, a lease payment is less than a finance payment. And like I mentioned, the residual value, something we'll talk a lot about. It's really important when it comes to leasing. It's the estimated value of the vehicle at the end of the lease term. So that's what you're paying the car down to, from the starting price down to the residual value, as opposed to paying it down to zero when you finance a car. So it's also the amount, the residual value is the amount you would pay at the end of the lease if you wanted to own the car. So you can purchase your lease at the end for the residual value. And the lower the residual value, the higher the lease payment. So the more you have to pay down the car, the more your lease payment will be. So it's good sometimes to look for cars that have, hold their value well. Those are good leases. And also the residual value is determined by the leasing company, not the dealership. And we'll learn more about that later. Dealerships will sometimes support residual values, which, finance companies will, which makes lease deals better. And sometimes they won't, which makes lease deals not so great. And we'll get into more of that later. And some more benefits of leasing, as I'm sure you're aware, you get a brand new car every 2 to 3 years. That's one of the main reasons we love to lease, because we always want to get the newest car with the newest features and all the updates, and keep ourselves in the nicest car we can. Another big reason people lease, and another big benefit, is you always have a manufacturer's warranty for the most part. As long as you're leasing, getting out of a lease within 36 months or 3 years, then you should always be under the manufacturer's warranty. So you don't have to worry about all those, anything going wrong with the car, where someone who finances a car, once it's out of warranty, they're responsible. If the transmission goes or something else is a problem, they're on the hook to fix it themselves. When you're in a lease, you just take it back to the dealer and get it fixed for free. Another benefit of leasing are the maintenance costs are low. Just like I was mentioning, you won't have to deal with any of those big ticket issues that arise later in a car's life, because you're always turning it in before you ever get to have an old car. You always have a new car. Another benefit of leasing is you are not responsible for a loss in value that was not caused by you. So if you take the car back at the end of the lease and you're within your mileage limit and you didn't damage the car, you took good care of it, if the car's lost value on the market, that's great. That's not your problem. You can turn it into the dealership. That's the finance company's issue to deal with. You get to walk away from negative equity, where if you own the car, you'd be paying that negative equity out of pocket to turn in the car and get out of it. And on the flip side of that, which this might be happening to you, I know a lot of people have been experiencing the joys of the increased values in the used car market. So if you have positive equity at the end of your lease, you can keep it. And this is happening a lot in the current car market. We're going to talk all about selling or trading in your lease with positive equity in the later lessons. So stay tuned for that. And then I also just wanted to touch on, when does purchasing or financing a car actually beat leasing? Because I finance and own some of my cars. Not every car I have is a lease, and so there's times when financing a car makes more sense. So just like I said before, ask yourself, how long do I plan to keep this car? If you will drive it until after it's paid off and are not concerned with resale value, then you should purchase it. So at some point in the future, years, several years after you've paid it off, and you go to sell it, you don't have a note on it or owe anything, whatever you get for it's just a bonus. But you're going to buy this car, you're going to own it long term, and you're never going to try and trade it in before it's paid off. And in fact, you're going to drive it. If you drive a paid off car for several years with no car payment, then you catch up to the savings of a lease payment. So someone who's in a lease always has a payment. So you're aware of that. But if you always have a payment and it's always a finance payment, then it's probably higher than a lease payment. You should be leasing. But like I said, if you're going to own a car, own it long term, pay it off, drive it with no payment for several years, then by all means, purchase the vehicle. And just be aware, you will also be responsible for the ongoing maintenance and care and the things that come up when a car gets older. So when you don't have a payment, you don't also, you also have these other expenses. So they can kind of offset each other. So that's another reason why people decide to lease. So you don't have to deal with any of that. And finally, the person who is trading in a car they financed before it was paid off, they've paid more for the car they've paid more to drive the car for the same period of time, and they likely have negative equity like we were discussing. So it costs even more to get out of the car. So stop trading in cars before they're paid off. If that's something you do or done in the past, leasing is probably the better way to go. All right, that's the end of this first lesson. I will see you in the next one.